Hello everybody, my name is Michael Carter and I never imagined I would be telling this story. I am a scientist, a geophysicist who dedicated years to studying Antarctica's ice layers, always relying solely on what I could measure and verify. I never believed in anything beyond science until August 14th, 2024, when everything changed. On that day, my life ended, and I began to see the world in a way I never thought possible. During an expedition, a disaster occurred, and before I could understand it, I found myself floating above my own body, watching the scene from above. But what happened next defied all the laws of physics I had so long trusted. Someone was waiting for me, someone who would change everything I thought I knew, Jesus. He showed me the truth about Antarctica, about the great lie that is about to be revealed to the world, and about what really exists beyond the ice walls. It was meant to be just another day of research in the frozen vastness of Antarctica. Our scientific team, composed of experts from various fields, was there with one clear objective: to investigate strange electromagnetic signals that had been detected beneath the ice. These signals were irregular, oscillated in ways that made no sense, and seemed to emerge from a depth that, according to scientific models, should be nothing but solid ice. My role was to analyze these patterns and determine whether they were linked to some unknown geothermal activity or if they concealed something not yet identified by science. On the morning of August 14th, I woke up early at the research base. The sun had barely touched the horizon, tinting the sky with a pale, spectral blue glow. As I put on my thermal gear, I felt a strange tightness in my chest, a premonition difficult to explain. It wasn't fear, but something told me that this day would be different. I ignored the feeling, attributing it to the accumulated fatigue from weeks of incessant work. That day's mission was crucial. We were going to drill deeper than ever, right at the point where the mysterious signals were strongest. Little did we know that the closer we got to the unknown, the more the reality we knew would begin to crumble. As we started drilling, something strange began to happen. Our equipment, calibrated to withstand the extreme conditions of Antarctica, started exhibiting inexplicable failures. The GPS wavered, our electrical instruments suffered constant interference, and even our radio communications began to emit static and distorted noises, as if something were trying to interfere with the signal. At first, we thought it was just a technical problem caused by the intense cold, but then we heard something that sent chills down our spines. The radios began to pick up whispers, faint, distorted voices that seemed to come from the ice itself. None of us could understand what they were saying, but the sensation was unsettling. We tried to trace the source of the signal, but it simply made no sense. It appeared to be coming from all directions at once. It was at that moment that a crack echoed across the ice. Before we could react, the ground trembled beneath our feet, and at 11:42, everything happened at once. The ice, which until then had seemed as solid as stone, simply collapsed beneath me. There was no time to scream or try to escape. One moment I was there, and the next I was falling into the void. The fall seemed to last an eternity, but in reality, it was only a few seconds. The world around me became a blur of white and blue as my body plunged into the newly opened abyss. The biting cold enveloped me like invisible razors, and the only thing I heard before impact was the distant echo of someone shouting my name over the radio. But when my body finally struck something solid, I felt no pain. I felt nothing. It was then that I realized the impossible. I was there, watching everything happen, but from a different perspective. My body lay still, partially buried by the ice debris. Yet I was above it, observing the scene like a spectator. The panic I expected never came. Instead, an indescribable peace took over me. The cold, the pain, the fear, all vanished. And then I noticed I wasn't alone. There were figures around the fissure, beings enveloped in a light so intense that they seemed to shine against the abyss's darkness. They were not human. I knew that deep in my soul. Yet, somehow I also knew they were not there to harm me. Before I could understand what was happening, I felt a force pulling me upward. The ice, the debris, my team, everything began to disappear as I was enveloped by an indescribable light. It wasn't just brightness, it was something alive, pulsating, charged with an energy that coursed through my very essence. Then I heard a voice. "Michael!" It was the most powerful and at the same time the most serene voice I had ever heard. The moment he spoke my name, I knew. I didn't need to ask or seek explanations. Before me stood Jesus. My heart overflowed with a love so pure and absolute that tears streamed down my face without my even noticing. All the doubts I had carried about life, death, and the afterlife, all dissolved in that moment. And then he spoke again. "You need to see." The very next moment, everything around me transformed. The ice, the sky, the research base, all disappeared. I was no longer in Antarctica. Instead, I found myself before a landscape impossible to describe in human words. It was a place that did not belong to this world, and yet it seemed more real than anything I had ever experienced. The ground beneath my feet wasn't ice, wasn't rock, but something different, something that vibrated with a living energy. And then, on the horizon, I saw gigantic walls rose up like a fortress that seemed to extend as far as my eyes could see. But these ice walls were not just natural formations, they had a purpose. Jesus stood by my side, observing my reaction. I didn't need to ask. Deep down, I already knew. Those walls were there to keep something contained, something that should never be unleashed. As I tried to process what I was seeing, Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. In that same instant, my vision expanded. Suddenly, I wasn't merely looking at those walls. I was seeing beyond them. What I witnessed filled me with a profound dread. Beneath the ice, hidden for ages, lay something colossal. Entire cities, structures that defied every logical explanation of human architecture. But they weren't merely constructions. Something there was alive. I could see shadows moving among the ruins, presences that did not belong to our world. They were not human, nor were they simply creatures. They were ancient, imprisoned there for a purpose that I now clearly understood. These walls were not erected to protect men from the cold, Jesus said, his voice heavy with sadness and authority. They were built to seal that which is dormant. My heart pounded at those words. Somehow I already knew that what was imprisoned there was neither natural nor something we should ever try to awaken. But then the vision shifted. I saw the future. I saw governments and scientists, including some of my own colleagues, drilling ever deeper. They were convinced they had discovered something revolutionary, something that would change the course of humanity. But what they did not know was that they were about to unleash something that should never be awakened. Jesus showed me images of conferences, newspaper headlines, and live broadcasts celebrating the greatest discovery in the history of science. World leaders spoke of humanity's advancement, of a new knowledge that would usher in a new era. But behind all that, I saw the true plan unfolding. The world was being prepared to accept something far greater, something that was not just an archaeological discovery, but the beginning of a deception that would seal humanity's fate. You are only seeing the beginning, Jesus said, as the vision expanded before me. What seemed like a moment of scientific breakthrough soon turned into something far darker. I saw how governments, along with hidden forces behind them, began to manipulate the narrative. First, they would present the discoveries as mere ancient ruins. Then, they would insinuate that they belonged to an advanced civilization unknown to humanity. But in the end, the distorted truth that would be pushed onto the world was even more dangerous. They would claim that these beings were our creators. I felt a chill run down my spine as I saw crowds accepting this lie without question. People abandoning their beliefs, rejecting everything they knew about God, convinced that this new revelation was the key to humanity's evolution. But I saw beyond what they saw. These entities were not benevolent. They were not spiritual guides and far from being our creators. They were something much older and much more dangerous. The vision continued, and what I saw was even more disturbing. The media, the scientists, and even religious leaders began preparing the world to accept these entities as benefactors. Documentaries, interviews, and books emerged, all pointing to a new era of knowledge, a wake-up call to the true history of humanity. Resistance to the narrative was ridiculed, labeled as conspiracy theory or religious fanaticism. I even saw churches divided, some warning about the deception, many others embracing the revelation as a new truth, adapting their doctrines to fit the grand lie. Then Jesus showed me something even more terrifying. A moment when humanity would finally cross the point of no return. Governments, in partnership with these entities, would introduce a new system, a solution that promised to end diseases, hunger, and even death. A technology that would allow man to evolve into something more, something supposedly superior. But the truth was far worse. What they were offering wasn't just a scientific breakthrough, it was a trap. Whoever accepted this evolution would lose something essential, their soul. It will be presented as a gift, Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. But in reality, it will be a choice that many will make without realizing what they are sacrificing. And then I saw it. Endless lines of people accepting this new technology, receiving implants, genetic modifications, and enhancements that promised a longer, stronger, smarter life. But instead of progress, I saw something terrible. Their spiritual connections were being severed. They still breathed, talked, smiled, but inside, something within them had been silenced forever. I saw people who once sought God now unable to feel His presence. Their prayers became empty, unanswered. They didn't realize what they had lost, for it was done gradually, subtly. The grand illusion was that no one was forced to accept this change. It was a choice, an invitation wrapped in promises of enlightenment and progress. But in reality, it was the definitive separation between man and his creator. Humanity was being deceived, not by weapons or oppression, but by the seduction of progress and immortality. While I watched this terrible transformation, I realized something even worse. Those who refused to accept this new reality were deemed enemies of progress. At first, they were simply ridiculed, treated as ignorant or backward. But soon, the persecution began. I saw laws being implemented, banning those who rejected the evolution. People were being removed from their jobs, their bank accounts blocked, their families torn apart. The world, which once saw itself as a defender of freedom, quickly became a place where those who wanted to retain their humanity were viewed as a threat. Then I saw the next step in the plan. A global event, meticulously orchestrated, would be the final trigger. Something so grand and impactful that even the most skeptical would surrender. The entire world would be led to believe that they were witnessing a unique moment in history, a point of no return. Jesus showed me crowds celebrating, convinced they were witnessing humanity's greatest revelation. But I knew the truth. I saw the deception for what it truly was. The world was bowing not to saviors, but to that which had always been hidden beneath the ice, waiting for the right moment to return. This will be the greatest deception in history, Jesus said, his voice filled with deep sorrow. And many will accept it willingly, without realizing that they are giving up the only thing that truly matters. I saw world leaders gathered announcing to the world that the great revelation had arrived. They claimed that humanity had never been alone. that we now had the chance to evolve into something greater, something divine. But it was all a lie. They were merely paving the way for the arrival of something far darker. Then I saw the final piece of the plan. A being not human who would appear to the world as a savior. His presence was imposing, his voice charismatic, his wisdom unquestionable. He promised peace, progress, and unlimited knowledge, and people worshipped him. But his eyes betrayed his true nature. There was no light in them, only darkness. I knew immediately who he was, the ruler to come, the final leader of a deceived humanity. The world was not merely accepting a lie, it was bowing before deception personified. Jesus then showed me something that made my heart tremble. I saw those who remained faithful, who refused the lie and did not submit to the evolution. They were few compared to the multitude, but they were there, scattered around the world, keeping the flame of truth alive. They had no power, no wealth, and were ruthlessly persecuted. Yet there was something in them that set them apart, a light that surrounded them, an invisible force that protected them. They were not alone. Then I saw the final conflict. The world was becoming unrecognizable, divided between those who accepted the deception and those who remained steadfast. The persecution of the faithful grew, becoming brutal and relentless. Yet even amid the chaos, these few chosen ones did not waver. They knew the truth. They knew that this was not merely a battle between men, but a spiritual war that had been fought since the beginning of time. The fate of humanity was at stake, and most had no idea what was truly happening. Then Jesus showed me the decisive moment. The time of deception would reach its peak, and those who had accepted the lie would have no turning back. I saw people completely surrendered to the new order, worshipping the false savior as if he were the answer to all of humanity's problems. But I also saw those who resisted, hidden, persecuted, yet unyielding. They weren't fighting with weapons or physical force, but with faith, and that faith was the only thing preventing the darkness from consuming everything. I wanted to ask Jesus how much time remained, when it would all happen. But before I could speak, he simply looked at me, and I understood the answer without words. Time was already in motion. The deception had already begun in small doses, gradually preparing the world. Everything I had seen wasn't some distant future, it was happening now, before our very eyes, while few noticed. And then I felt a tug. The vision began to dissipate, and I realized that my journey was coming to an end. Suddenly, everything disappeared. The light, the visions, the presence of Jesus, all dissolved, and I was enveloped by a profound darkness. Then a shock ran through my chest, and my lungs filled with air as if I had been pulled from an abyss. I was back. The sound of agitated voices and medical alarms filled the room. My eyes opened, dazed by the cold light of the hospital. Doctors and nurses surrounded me, incredulous. "He's back!" someone exclaimed. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, as if I had been away too long. One of the doctors approached and, with a skeptical look, asked, "Michael, you were dead for 12 minutes. Do you remember anything?" I swallowed hard. How could I explain everything I had seen? How could I tell them that the world was about to be deceived? Then, with my voice still weak, I spoke the only words that mattered at that moment. Jesus is real. What is coming is a great lie. Silence took over the room. Some doctors exchanged uneasy glances, others simply shook their heads, as if my words were nothing but post-traumatic delirium. But one nurse, a young woman at the back of the room, widened her eyes as if she understood. She stepped forward hesitantly and said in a low voice, I've heard about that, about what they are hiding in Antarctica." Before I could respond, the doctor beside me cut the conversation short. "You've had a near-death experience, Michael. It's normal to have hallucinations. Let's focus on your recovery." But I knew that what I had seen was not a hallucination. It was the truth. And the more I tried to explain, the more I realized that no one wanted to listen. Yet deep inside, I knew that this mission did not end there. I had returned for a reason, and I needed to find a way to warn the world before it was too late. In the days that followed, I tried to resume my life, but nothing made sense anymore. The scientific data that once consumed me now seemed trivial. I knew the truth. I knew what was about to happen. But how could I make people believe? How could I convince a world conditioned to reject anything outside the official narrative? Then, something happened. While I was still recovering, I received an unexpected visit. A man I had never seen before entered my hospital room. He wore a dark suit and had a serious look, as if he knew exactly who I was and what I had experienced. He leaned close and in a low tone said only one sentence: "You are not wrong. But if you want to live, forget what you saw." Before I could respond, he turned and left as if he had never been there. In that moment, I understood. They already knew I had returned, and they would do anything to silence me. That visit confirmed everything. I was not just dealing with a spiritual vision. There were forces in this world actively working to keep this truth hidden. I knew that if I wanted to survive, I had to be cautious. But I also knew that remaining silent was not an option. I spent the following days reflecting on how I could share this message without being immediately discredited or worse, eliminated. So I began slowly. First, with close friends, people I knew had open minds regarding hidden truths. Some listened with respect, though it was hard for them to accept something so vast. Others called me paranoid. Then something unexpected happened. A former colleague, someone who had worked with me on Antarctic expeditions, contacted me. He was nervous, as if hesitant to speak, but in the end, he said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Michael, there are more people seeing what you saw, and they are disappearing." Those words echoed in my mind. They are disappearing. What began as a spiritual vision was now blending with a real conspiracy, something happening before our eyes, yet noticed by so few. My former colleague refused to say more over the phone. He said we needed to meet in person, but that I should be careful. He gave me an address and arranged to meet in 2 days. That night, something inside told me I was being watched. When I looked out my window, I noticed a car parked on the street, its headlights off, yet clearly positioned strategically. I tried to ignore the fear, but the reality was clear. My attempt to expose the truth had already drawn attention. The next morning, before I could leave for the meeting, I received a new message from my former colleague. "Forget everything. They know. Disappear." And then his number was disconnected. My heart pounded. I knew what that meant. He had been found, or worse. Now there was no doubt. This truth could not be revealed without consequences. I was dealing with something far bigger than I had imagined. What frightened me even more was that if he had indeed disappeared, then everything I had seen during my near-death experience was even more real than I could conceive. I stood there for a while, trying to decide my next move. I could run, hide, or pretend none of this had happened. But then I remembered Jesus' words, "You need to see." I wasn't brought back to remain silent. They could threaten me, they could try to silence me, but the truth had to be told. I grabbed my laptop and began writing everything I knew. If something happened to me, the world needed a record. Time was running out. I spent hours writing, detailing every vision, every message from Jesus, every detail about the deception that was coming. I had to ensure this information spread before they could stop me, but as I typed, something strange happened. My computer began to freeze. Files vanished before my eyes, as if someone were remotely accessing the system. My heart raced. They were trying to silence me before I could finish. I immediately disconnected the laptop from the internet, but I knew it wasn't enough. I grabbed a USB drive and saved everything I could, then made physical copies, writing by hand the most important parts. I had to be smarter. If they wanted to silence me, they'd have to race against time. I took the USB drive and left my apartment that very night with one objective: to find someone who could help me spread this truth before it was too late. My mind raced as I drove through the city that night. Who could help me? Who would believe something so grand without calling me crazy? I couldn't simply post everything online. If they were monitoring me, my message would be erased before it could gain traction. I needed someone with a voice, influence, and most importantly, the courage to confront the system. Then I thought of an independent journalist, someone who had exposed dark secrets in the past. His name was Ryan Mitchell. He had a history of investigating conspiracies and exposing truths that mainstream media refused to touch. If anyone could carry this story forward, it would be him. I drove to his office, a small, discreet building on the outskirts of the city, and knocked on the door. For a moment I thought he wouldn't answer, but then the door opened and there he was, looking at me with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Michael Carter?" he asked. I nodded. "We need to talk, now." Ryan led me into his office, closed the door, and drew the curtains. His demeanor told me that he already knew something big was happening. We sat facing each other, and he crossed his arms, studying me with an analytical gaze. "Speak," he said simply. I didn't waste any time. I told him everything, from the Antarctic expedition to my near-death experience and the visions Jesus had shown me. I explained about the ice walls, the dormant entities, and the deception unfolding before our eyes. Ryan listened in silence, absorbing every word. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, as if processing everything. Then he sighed and shook his head. "You're not the first to tell me something like this," he murmured. "But if what you're saying is true, we're closer to the end than we imagined." My body tensed at his words. "What do you mean?" I asked. Ryan opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope, tossing it onto the table. "In the past few months, I've received information from various sources: scientists, military personnel, people who worked on secret operations in Antarctica. They were all investigating something the government is about to reveal, but there's a common pattern among them." He paused and looked me in the eyes. "They all disappeared." I swallowed hard. I had suspected it, but hearing confirmation made my stomach churn. Ryan opened the envelope and spread some photos and documents on the table. They were satellite images, maps with strategic points marked, records of coded transmissions. Everything indicated that something was happening beneath the ice, something that could no longer be hidden. "They are laying the groundwork," Ryan continued. "Little by little, they're leaking information so that the public gets used to the idea. But when they reveal the truth, it will be too late." I looked at the documents spread on the table, each reinforcing what I already knew. The deception was underway, and we were running out of time. "What can we do?" I asked, trying to quell the panic. Ryan crossed his arms and looked at me seriously. "We need to expose this before they control the narrative. If we wait for the official revelation, it will be too late. People need to know now." He handed me one of the documents. "This is a leaked report from a recent expedition. What they found wasn't just a structure, it was something active, something that emits signals." My eyes scanned the page quickly, and a chill ran down my spine. I already knew that. I had seen it during my out-of-body experience. But now there was physical evidence that scientists were already interacting with what was trapped beneath the ice. "If we don't act now," Ryan said, "they will rewrite history, and all of humanity will be deceived." I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. I knew Ryan was right. If we waited, the truth would be buried under carefully crafted lies. But revealing something of this magnitude wasn't simple. If we go public, they'll silence us before we can spread the information, I argued. They're already tracking my every move. Ryan nodded. That's why we need to be strategic. I have contacts, people in alternative media who can help us leak this to multiple channels at once. If we try to publish it through one outlet, they might shut it down before it gains traction. But if we release everything at once, in various places around the world, it will be impossible to erase. He stood up and grabbed his laptop. But we must act now. Time is against us. I felt a weight in my chest. This was my last chance. Jesus had given me this mission, brought me back to warn the world, and now I faced the final decision. There was no more running away. I spent the entire night with Ryan, organizing files, gathering evidence, and preparing the biggest disclosure of my life. He contacted independent journalists, programmers, and others who could help spread the truth without being easily tracked. We made copies of the documents, scheduled automated postings, and ensured that once the information was released, it couldn't be erased. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, Ryan looked at me. "Are you ready for this? Once we press this button, there's no turning back." I took a deep breath. I knew what was at stake. I knew I was risking my life, but I also knew that was why I'd returned. I looked at him and nodded. The truth must be told. Without hesitation, Ryan clicked the send button. In a matter of seconds, everything we knew was spreading across the internet, reaching millions of people worldwide. The countdown to the final deception was over. Now humanity would have to choose between believing the lie or seeing the truth. In the first few minutes, nothing happened. The silence was absolute, as if we were waiting for the storm to hit. Then chaos began. In real time, we saw the files being downloaded, shared, and replicated across dozens of platforms. Social media exploded with speculations, videos, and live broadcasts analyzing every detail of the leaked information. Some called it the greatest revelation in history. Others dismissed it as an absurd conspiracy theory, but one thing was clear: the truth was out of control. Then the first signs of retaliation appeared. Entire news channels were taken down, profiles disappeared, and some pages were quickly labeled as dangerous misinformation. But it was too late. The information had been spread by ordinary people, citizens who could not be silenced easily. We received messages from scientists, military personnel, and journalists who had long suspected something was being hidden. What once was a whisper in the shadows had become a collective shout. But I knew it wouldn't end there. They would react, and when they did, they would show no mercy. The counterattack was swift and brutal. In less than 24 hours, major news platforms discredited the story, calling it alarming misinformation and baseless theory. Experts were put on camera to ridicule the evidence, and anyone who tried to disclose the truth was labeled a lunatic or extremist. But what truly worried me was what happened next. Ryan received a call from one of his government contacts. "They're coming after you," said the voice on the other end. "You and Carter need to disappear now." Ryan hung up without a word and looked at me with a mix of fear and urgency. "We need to get out of here." Before we could react, the building's lights flickered and went out. Outside, the sound of tires screeching on the street cut through the early morning silence. They had found us. We didn't hesitate. Ryan grabbed his laptop and the most important documents while I ran to the back door. The building was plunged into darkness, and only the sound of hurried footsteps outside told us we had little time. "There's a car in the underground garage," Ryan whispered. "If we get there without being seen, we can escape." We hurried down the stairs, trying to make as little noise as possible. We heard voices upstairs, orders being shouted, the sound of doors being forced open. They were hunting us. My heart pounded as we ran through the dimly lit parking lot. Ryan pressed the button on the key fob and the car's lights blinked before us, but at that exact moment, a beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness. "Hey, they're here!" someone shouted. Time was up. Without thinking, I jumped into the passenger seat as Ryan turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared and the tires screeched on the asphalt as he floored the accelerator. In the rearview mirror, I saw armed men running toward us. One of them raised a gun. "Keep your head down," Ryan shouted. A gunshot rang out, and the rear window shattered into a shower of glass shards. Ryan made a sharp turn to exit the underground parking, skidding on the wet concrete. We burst out onto the deserted early morning street. "They're after us," I murmured, glancing back. He nodded, keeping his eyes fixed on the road. "Yes, but now everyone has seen the truth. They can chase us, but they cannot stop what has begun." Despite the danger, I felt something different in that moment. Hope. The truth was out there, and now nothing could erase it. Ryan drove non-stop for nearly an hour, cutting through side streets and avoiding any predictable route. We knew they were after us, and that if we were captured, we wouldn't just be arrested, we would vanish. We needed a plan. "We can't keep running forever," I murmured, still smelling gunpowder and broken glass inside the car. Ryan nodded. "I have a safe place. A contact of mine has a bunker outside the city, disconnected from the network. We can regroup there and assess the real impact of what we published." I knew that was our best option. Yet something inside told me this was only the beginning. They might chase us, silence us, but the truth was already in the world. The only question now was, how many people were willing to see it? We arrived at the hideout just before dawn. It was a discreet cabin, far from the city, surrounded by dense trees and devoid of any modern technology. Ryan turned off the car and looked around before speaking. "If they've tracked us down, we can't stay here long." I nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion and the urgency of the situation. Once inside, Ryan booted up a laptop protected by an offline system. He had a locally stored database with no internet connection, where he could monitor the impact of our leaked information. "The truth is spreading," he said, as he analyzed the reports. "But there's also a massive disinformation campaign. They're flooding us with distractions to minimize the impact." I sighed. It wasn't surprising. They would do anything to control the narrative. "And now?" I asked. Ryan looked at me seriously. "Now we wait for their response, and we prepare for the worst." Time seemed to pass slowly as we waited. Every sound outside put us on alert. Every news update brought new pieces to the puzzle. The government was acting fast. While some independent channels still discussed the revelations, mainstream media already had their response ready. They denied everything, ridiculed the information, and presented experts to discredit anything outside the official narrative. But what worried me most was something Ryan discovered in internal files from anonymous forums. "Look at this," he said, turning the laptop toward me. The screen displayed accounts from scientists and military personnel trying to speak out, only to be silenced. Some vanished overnight. Others, after warning their families, were immediately discredited. They're not only controlling the information, they're erasing anyone who might confirm the truth. A chill ran down my spine. Were we next? Or were we already condemned from the moment we decided to expose everything? Ryan closed the laptop and rubbed his face, visibly tense. "If we want to stay alive, we need to be smarter than they are," he said. "They're already one step ahead, erasing witnesses, shaping the narrative. If we don't act now, in a few days, no one will believe the truth anymore." I knew he was right, but what frightened me most was the feeling that nothing we did was enough. Their plan had been in motion for decades. The revelation about Antarctica would not only be accepted by the world, it would be celebrated. The deception was designed to be perfect. But then I remembered Jesus' words, "Those who seek the truth shall see." Perhaps we couldn't save everyone, but there was still time to awaken those who were ready. "We have to find a way to keep this truth alive," I murmured, "before they silence us forever." Ryan paused for a moment, then stood up decisively. "We need to decentralize the information. The more people who have access to what we know, the less chance they have to erase it all." He began gathering USB drives and external hard drives, copying every file we had. "We're going to send this to strategic individuals, independent journalists, skeptical researchers, even religious leaders who might be willing to listen." I watched him work, but a doubt lingered. "What if it isn't enough?" I asked. "What if they simply counter it with more disinformation?" Ryan stopped and looked at me seriously. "They may try, but now there's something they can't control: faith. Those who are awake will feel that something is wrong. Our mission isn't to convince everyone, it's to reach those who can still see." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't alone, and now we knew exactly what to do. With the files copied and distributed, our part was done. We couldn't control how the world reacted, but we were sure the truth was out there. Ryan sent the final copies to trusted contacts, while I watched out the window, feeling that something inside me was finally calming down. Then I picked up my phone and recorded one final message. "If you are listening to this, it means that the revelation has already begun. The deception will be glorified, celebrated as the greatest advancement in human history. But remember, not everything that glitters is light. The true battle has always been spiritual. Stand firm. Do not accept what they offer. Trust in Jesus. He showed me the truth, and now I pass it on. Time is running out." I set the message to be published automatically if something happened to me. I looked at Ryan, who met my gaze with a mix of exhaustion and determination. "And now?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "Now we wait, and we pray that people choose to see." And so, we came to the end. Are we witnessing signs of something far greater unfolding before our eyes? The truth is there for those willing to see it. If this video made you reflect, don't forget to like and share it with someone who needs to hear this. And of course, subscribe to the channel because we post new videos every day with information that no one wants you to know. Stay alert, stay awake, see you in the next video.